I actually double checked and I totally brain farted in the last video, but the actual component is really better when you have separate selections. So we're actually going to see when we make our spokes for our chair, it's going to work quite well and quite properly. But since we had a bunch of edges that were all kind of continuous, it doesn't really work exactly the way transform would. And I like I said, I just temporarily brain farted. And my component is really useful for moving along normal direction when you don't have touching faces. So if it was kind of like these guys right here, like kind of weren't touching, and used component, you notice how it kind of lines up better, like along normal direction kind of stuff. So it is a little bit different than your standard transform. So keep that in mind. I just temporarily brain farted. Transform is really what you're going to want to do for, particularly when you have a bunch of continuous selections that you want to move along normal direction, right? Particularly like these ones. When we make our spokes on our office chair, those will be separate, and that's when component's going to come into its own. It's pretty cool. I just forgot it doesn't really work the same way with continuous selections, right? So I kind of still like transform. Transform can be cool for that stuff. All right. So briefly, what I want to do is just two quick videos. One's going to be just our cleaning up outliner, because we always do that, right? So I'm going to go to Channel Box Layer Editor. And in this case, this is going to be a pretty easy one because of the fact that we can make these into a bunch of objects, right? So I'm actually going to make our life easier, and we can just go to Modeling Toolkit, Combine, right? Just make sure the buttons are all one. Now if I hit 1, you'll see those look great, right? So remember, if you're working in Smooth Preview, you really want to eventually smooth your model, right? So remember, be in object mode because we want to smooth the whole object. And there's a button right here called Smooth. And division of 1 is what we want. We can then hit Q to kind of get out of there. There we go. And now you'll see that that is fully our low resolution. Now at this point, if you really wanted to trim these buttons down, you could actually take a few edge loops out, right? Not terribly hard. You can always go to edge mode, kind of double click on every other edge loop, right? Control delete, take those out, and you see how your shape still maintains pretty well. So this can actually be a pretty great way to trim this down if you need to, right? So keep that in mind. You can always select edge loops, hit Control delete to take edge loops out, and that way you get a lot of the roundness that you want, but maybe not all of it. In this case, we're fine with this because we're specifically going to have an exercise later in the semester that's going to have us res this stuff down a little bit. But that's not exercise 2, it's going to be exercise 3. For now, we're fine. This is going to be good. We're still going to have a pretty good model built for us that's not ridiculously heavy polygon count-wise. It'll work in a lot of pipelines, particularly if you're in film. Those buttons are a little bit much for video games. Those will probably just all be textured. Like you'd have the large kind of shape here, and then you'd probably just do some sculpting, bake it down to a normal mount. It's kind of one of the tricks I use for video games. But here we're trying to get you guys to actually model this whole thing, right? All right. Remember, whenever you're working Smooth Preview, smooth it, right? Because if I hit 1, it could look better. But for an object mode, when we hit Smooth, there we go. Hit Q. That's now our low reses, right? Our low reses are right there. And you'll notice, polygon count-wise, really not terribly heavy, right? Only about 7,000 triangles, right? A little bit heavy for a clock in a video game, but for movies or TV, not. That's actually a good low-resolution mesh. So remember, if you're working in Smooth Preview, smooth that model. That's what that smooth does right there, is it actually applies the Smooth Preview for real. There's now actual real polygons there. So just kind of a little bit last-minute stuff for that stuff. Channel Box Layer Editor is what we want to see here, because we're going to point these out in a minute. And of course, we're going to go Windows Outliner. There's our outliner, right? Remember, that's the list of everything that's in your scene. The cameras are hidden. That's why they're kind of darker gray, right? That's how your display hide and show work. And if you haven't hidden a bunch of things and you need to show them, go into Outliner, right? Windows Outliner, find them, right? Usually the dark gray, and then you can go to Display, Show Selection, right? But in this case, you'll notice that these are not quite where we need to be. We can't really trust the freeze transforms yet because they're in groups. But we see that we've got history, right? So if I click on this object, there's that smooth we did, and then there's the combine, and we did those edge loops. Extraction is the separate, the extrusions we did. Just like here, you can see smooth and a bunch of extrusions, right? Poly splits. Remember, history is everything you've done to your object. You can actually go back in here and adjust the properties. The thing though is if I go back to, say, poly split here, and I say, hey, I want, more subdivisions, that can kind of do some weird stuff sometimes, right? Kind of made that go weird in terms of its shape. So history is one of those things that for modeling is cooler in theory than it actually is in practice. Sometimes it is useful, but a lot of times it's actually pretty useless. But remember, history is everything that you've done to your object. The most recent things at the top, the first thing you did, right, which is way, way down here, is the poly cylinder that we created, right? So keep that in mind, right, that's kind of your history. So one of the first things I always do to clean up my outliner, and you could do this as you go, right? You don't have to wait till you're done. I usually do it just so I'm not overloading you with tons and tons of stuff all the time. Definitely before you pass it off to somebody else, though, you really want to do this cleaning process, right? But you can actually do it as you go to keep your scene clean, right? If your history gets too big, too many of these, sometimes it can bog Maya down performance-wise. It can cause Maya to take a couple minutes to load a Maya scene in. So it's a good idea to periodically actually just delete your history anyways. But remember, that's an edit. Delete by type history. There's a quick key for it. And when there's a quick key for something in Maya, that means it gets used a lot. Alt-Shift-D. And you notice that that deletes that history for all your objects. Now the cool thing is you'll notice it got rid of just about every one of those groups in Outliner also. Now some of you guys might still see pluses in front of stuff. I think that's kind of a new thing in Maya 20, and I'm working in Maya 2019. Haven't got my employee verification to download Maya 20. And there's nothing really new that we have to worry about for an intro class anyways. So if you see pluses, it's only pluses that are in front of the red arrow kind of parallelogram ones, like this one, those are groups. If it's a plus in front of like poly surface that's got like these 4 like diamonds in a diamond shape, that's fine. That's not necessarily a group, right? So keep that in mind, but often when you delete history, it will actually get rid of a bunch of your groups anyways. So now what we have to do is we just have to select that group, because sometimes it'll still leave a group behind, and we go edit, ungroup. Come on, that should have worked. Edit, ungroup. There we go. And then, of course, select it again. Edit, ungroup. There we go. And sometimes there's groups within inside of groups, so you might have to ungroup a couple times, right? And now we're down to no groups at all, right? No pluses with the red arrow ones. Just the diamonds, right? If you have pluses in front of the diamonds, that's okay, as long as it's not the red arrow. All right. So those are our objects, and in this case you can see that our transforms are frozen also, right? Those are all zeros, those are all ones. Sometimes you want to wait till after you've ungrouped everything because you freeze transforms and it does it for the group, not the object. But you can always select your objects and go modify freeze transformations to make sure those are frozen. And this is now clean. We just have to label it, right? Double click, buttons. There we go. Grab this one, double click, clock. Remember, if you did double left click on the actual object in Outliner, you can rename it. And that is now a clean clock scene. And it's nice because then you turn it over to somebody else. They don't have to worry about history, right? They don't have to worry about these transforms all being weird. And they can go right in here and everything's labeled and they know, oh, it's the clock, that's the buttons, right? Grouping in and of itself is not a problem. We're going to see that on Project 5. It's just that the groups Maya was creating because of combine and separate or booleans or edit, mesh, duplicate, and extract, it creates kind of random groups. It creates groups kind of associated with those modeling processes, which usually are meaningless and weird. And that's why we have to clean those up as we eventually go along. All right, so I'm going to quickly go to File, Open Scene, and I'm going to open up the desk really quick so we can do it to the desk really quick. So that's all done. All right, so what I always do is I always kind of go in here and I grab this stuff. And like I said, I always grab everything because then I can just go to Edit, Delete by Type History. There we go. And I got rid of history for a bunch of stuff. And I actually got rid of a lot of those groups, right? And we're only left with this last group. And remember what's cool is if you click on a group, even in the viewport here, right? If I click on an object, you see how it grabs the object inside of that group? Right? And sometimes it's just one object inside of the group. It's kind of nonsensical the way that works sometimes in Maya. If I hit up arrow, that actually grabs the whole group. So kind of neat. But I'm going to click on that group, go to Edit, Ungroup, and there we go. Remember, it's the pluses in front of the red ones that are groups. If you're working my 20 and you have pluses in front of these ones, right, the diamond, the great gray diamonds, you should be okay. That's just, I think, plus is just kind of a display thing that they have on now by default. Now, in this case, you'll notice that some of these objects have transforms that aren't kind of frozen properly, right? So there's actual values there. If you wanted to double the size of this cabinetry, you'd have to figure out double 0.437, double 0.511, double, which is not terribly hard, but it's a lot easier if you modify freeze transformations, because then double the size, you just type in 222, right? So that's why we like freezing transforms eventually. That way, if we ever have to do that kind of stuff or make something twice as big, it's a lot easier, right? So I'm just going to select everything, modify freeze transformations. So we delete history to get rid of all that history. That often gets rid of the groups, or at least most of them. You might still have to go in and edit ungroup one or two of them. Not a big deal. And of course, we do modify freeze transformations. Now, this is the third time you guys have seen this, and we're going to see it a fourth time and a fifth time, right, for some of our other modeling projects. And of course, we just label these. So I can double click on this, call it desktop. There we go. Double click on this one, those are the legs. There we go. Double click on those, call them drawers. There we go. That's just going to be center drawer. There we go. And that's our back. Double click on that. Pull that back. And if you want to combine this into a few other objects, that's fine. I don't want it to be 0 objects, right? Like I might even just combine these really quick, I think. Modeling toolkit, combine. That will create new groups. So edit, or go to delete by type history, and that'll actually break those groups, right? So in particular, if you combine, separate, extrude, duplicate face, you know, kind of the anytime you boolean, combine, separate, extract, or edit, mesh, duplicate faces, if you did delete history on that object, it should actually get rid of all those groups for you, right? But you might need some of that history, so it's kind of, you know, depends on what you need. And we'll double click on that and call that cabinets. We don't have to have quite, you know, 20 objects, right? If you only want 4 or 5, that's fine. In fact, it's a little easier to work with. All right, and that is now our cleaned up scene for this stuff. Transforms are all frozen, history's all deleted, groups are all gone, at least the groups that we didn't want, and things are labeled. And that is, of course, cleaning up our outliner.